Hey there, this is Niels Beardfoot and today we are building a demon goat skull from leather. When you got your pattern printed and cut it out, keep this part for the moment in. We're using 2.5mm or 6-ounce wedge tanned leather for this project. After everything is cut out, use a beveler to break the edges. To emboss the leather, we want to moisten it completely from both sides. After some drying time, we start with punching some sewing holes. Now we get to the point where we need this inner piece here still. First, we use our stylus to trace all the lines from the pattern on the leather. But for the circles, it's easier and more precise if you use a wing divider for this. So the piece of the pattern that we left in and also in the leather marks the center point. And with our swivel knife that is well polished, we can now trace all these lines to later on bevel them as well. This is a beveler. We can use our favorite stone to hammer it in and this way create a more rustic look. It's now time to cut out this inner part and therefore we can use a curved blade tool like this, which is usually used for wood cutting, or hole punches also do the trick. We start by dyeing, in this case a little bit different than usual, by dyeing the edges black. This just gives everything in the end a cleaner look. Because the acrylic paint that we also going to use is not that well working on edges. Next, I use an airbrush to dye most of the flesh side black. Everything apart from the teeth and the nose area. Next, I go with some acrylic paint and airbrush it all over the piece. And on the teeth and the nose area, also on the flesh side. After this, some areas in light gray with acrylic paint as well, and after this, dark gray. This creates shadow and more depth and makes everything look a little bit more evil. Acrylic paint is water-based and therefore with a lot of water can be rubbed off. So to prevent this we use resist. But the problem is resist is also water-based. So you only want to carefully tap it on. Use multiple coats of at least 3. After everything dried completely, we can use antique gel to give it a more even, rustic, used look. After this, also to protect the antique gel, we go for at least another coat of resist. If you also put the resist on the edges, you can use the moisture to burnish them. Now these are the pieces that you should have. The upper forehead parts, the forehead and the rest of the skull. But there's also one thing missing, the horns. For texturing the horns, a bone photo works very well. Go for a lot of soft marks and then a few harder ones. through the texture, you can use some 1000 grit sandpaper to create more depth by taking off some of the high spots. And these are now all the horn parts that you should have. To make sewing together the horns easier, moisten them a bit. To bring the horns into their final shape, you want to really moisten them again, and then you can flip in these long straps that we just sewn on. While it's still moist, we want to make sure that, especially on the tip, the gap is closed. Something like rubber bands can help you here. Also, you can twist them into shape while they dry. Now, back to the skull. Here it's also easier to moisten some of the areas, like this one here, before we sew it together. Note here exactly how it is meant to be sewn together. It's this edge on this edge. For the upper forehead part, it's pretty much exactly the same, because on both of these areas will be horns held later on. And now we can put those together. This edge you want to also press out a little bit more to be more flat. These edges later on will be the eyes, and for this we also got these straps, and we want to sew them on like this. But first, to later on hide our eyes in the mask, we want to use some mesh fabric. We want to glue it on, and then along the edge want to flip it over. And it's important to take plenty of mesh fabric. This part that is now flipped over later on will cover the eyes, so you need quite a bit more than you might think. Next we can glue on these straps, but note that we only want to glue on the edge and also only about half of it, because the other half will be later on glued to the lower part of the skull. We cut through the sewing holes all the way through, and then we sew it on. And then we cut away all the excess leather, grind it down, bevel it, re-dye it and burnish it. Now for the lower part of the skull, we also want to moisten it, mostly the nose area, which is here, the tip. And then we can flip it over and sew it together. Now we want to marry the lower and the upper part of the skull, here in the front area and on both sides here. Now we want to water harden the skull. So take about 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit for maximum of 30 minutes. Be careful not to put it longer in, because acrylic paint, as I mentioned, does not really like being put into water. And here you can see some of the damages that I had. This is no big problem, we just have to fix it later. Give it at least 2 hours of drying time before you start shaping, and then a little bit turn out the eyes and bring everything in a more skullish, bony look and shape. Note that you always can come back and reshape it. You only have the risk of the acrylic paint being torn off partly. And this is about what we want to achieve here with the shape. Now we take care of the second half of the straps on the eyes. We glue them and sew them on, and also take, as before, care of the edge. Now to bring the mesh fabric in place, we want to use some glue along the edge just to hold it in place of the strap, glue it on, and then cut some new sewing holes and sew it. All the excess of the mesh fabric we can cut and burn off. To attach the horns, we need round holes for our screw rivets. So we punch them and put them on these base pieces for the horns as tight as possible. Then we mark the round hole on the skull and punch these as well. It's important to keep the horns very tight on the skull, else they may be loose and move around, and that's not what we want. I also tried using only one screw rivet, so we need only one hole, but in the end, 2 were definitely the way to go. This is our helmet base, and how to make this I show you in another video. Important are these round holes here. That's the attachment points, at least 2 of them. With the molding of the skull, the exact position of the round holes on the skull can change, so we definitely want to check if they line up. If you're sure they fit, punch them. and then use screw rivets to hold it in place on the base. Now, as additional attachment points, we got these pressure buttons. And for this, we use these little extenders with pressure buttons as well, put them on, and then sew them on the inside of the teeth. To take care of all these areas here, I first put on a coat of resist just to glue the edges of the paint in place, and then simply paint over them again. Here you can see the attachment holes on the base, and you might notice that I missed twice. So I make errors too, and this is how I take care of them. Also, there is a jar bone. You can put it on as well with screw rivets. And this is it. The finished demon goat skull. If you might notice, it has 4 horns. Not only 2, that's why it's a demon. There's also a spell circle on its face, so... I hope you enjoyed this video and probably learned something new. If you did, be sure to check out my other videos as well, and also all my patterns in my shop, links down below. And see you guys next time. Have a great day!